Good evening. Welcome to tonight's presentation, David Niven, Soldier turned movie star. My name is Nikki. I work for Westminster Libraries. My colleague Susie, who's going to be working the presentation in the background, works for our archives department. I'm really excited to welcome Simone Adams to do this talk. She runs a really great podcast, Classic Hollywood MTC. I think hopefully she'll tell us what the MTC stands for, but it's really good. It's biographical. There's talks on David Niven, Stanley Baker, Stewart Granger. They're all Merle Oberon. They're all great. So I'd really recommend that. I think for a lot of us of a certain age, David Niven is perhaps the first old-time movie star we knew. Mostly, I have to say, not from his films, but because of his books, which we're going to hear more about. I certainly read those when I was about 11 or 12, and I had no idea who he was or hadn't seen any of the films, but it just seemed really such an entertaining book. And it's one that I've gone back to and obviously learned a bit more about how truthful it is, which I'm sure is also something we're going to be hearing about. And my memory is that he was on chat shows all the time. Now, that couldn't quite have been the case because he lived in Switzerland, but he did pop over and do Parkinson and that sort of thing quite a lot when he wasn't doing coffee ads. And then eventually, I guess I must have seen some of the films, but that wasn't how I knew him at first. So I'm looking forward to hearing about the truth behind his life from Simone. So she's going to be talking for about 45 minutes. There's a Q&A facility at the bottom of the screen, so please do type your comments and questions, because we always have some really great and interesting comments as a result of these. So over to you, Simone.
Thanks, Nikki. Thank you and Susie for helping me put this talk together and with all the technicals, because I'm pretty useless with technicals. I've got so much to tell you about David Niven, and because we only have a short period of time, I'm going to be going at a fairly cracking speed. But as Julie Andrews says, let's start at the very beginning. The picture you see on the front there with David Niven in a sort of army bomber jacket is him appearing in the film A Matter of Life and Death, which I will talk about a little later in the talk. But let's go to the next slide if possible. Thank you very much. Family, duty, courage and tragedy. There you have a picture of David at age 2. The second picture is of him playing with his father. David Niven was born on the 1st of March 1910 on St. David's Day in London. He would put about, because he was a man who sometimes gilded the lily, that he was born in Scotland because he thought it was more glamorous. He had some Scottish relatives there who seemed to have a much more exciting life than his. And the Hollywood marketeers of his career would also say he was born in Scotland, but this is not true. His birth certificate says he was born in Belgravia Mansions, his family's London home in Grosvenor Gardens in central London. His full name on birth was James Graham David Niven, and he was the youngest of 4 kids. He had 2 sisters, and I'll ask you to remember that when we talk a little more about some of the films he was in, and 1 brother. His parents were aristocrats, Gentile aristocrats. William Niven with his dad, who spent most of his time being a gentleman, attending races and social events and going hunting in Africa and all sorts of things. And his mother, Henrietta de Garcher, was part Welsh and part French, and she had connections to French aristocracy in the Loire Valley in the south. Now, the family was a rather distant one, David Niven would say many years later. Although he loved his parents, he never really saw very much of them. They were too busy living a sort of high society life. And he was looked after by maids and footmen and butlers and all that sort of thing. They did have, rather like a Downton Abbey, they did have a family seat called Carswell Manor in Berkshire, but that was eventually lost to the family because David's father had to sell the manor to pay for racing debts. Very early on in David Niven's life, he suffered tragedy. He's a man that's often thought of as having had incredible luck in his personal and professional life, which to some extent he did, but he also faced much tragedy. And some of that tragedy started with the death of his father in World War I. His father was part of something called the Berkshire Yeomanry Infantry Regiment, and he enlisted in World War I with the rest of the regiment, was posted off to Turkey and the Dardanelles, and died at Gallipoli. This was part, in a sense, of a long-standing Niven tradition, because David could, through both sides of his family, mum and dad, track participation by past members of the family in various great events, military events of British history. So he could track relatives who died at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, fighting for Napoleon. He could track relatives that encountered all sorts of daring do and danger in the Indian Mutiny in 1857. And he could track relatives that fought in the Anglo-Zulu War in the 1870s. And he had mementos and archive evidence of all of that, which he kept all his life. Now, within a year of his father dying, his mother married again. And it was really one of the first, it was a second trauma in David's life. His father's death was his first trauma. He couldn't stand the guy that his mother married. His name was Thomas Coleman Platt, and he was a career diplomat and politician. Now, there's been a long-standing rumor, as there always is with Hollywood stars in terms of gossip, that in fact, Thomas Coleman Platt probably was his father. It's possible that the mother had had a relationship before her husband had died, and possibly David was Thomas Coleman Platt's son. Whether that's true or not, only the participants in that love story, that love triangle, can tell us, and they're all gone. But that's been a running rumor, a bit of gossip ever since David's youth. Now, the first thing that David's mother and Coleman Platt did, because they couldn't cope with him, he was already behaving very badly at age 5 and 6, was that they sent him off to boarding school. And it was a miserable experience for the first 10 to 13 years. He suffered the classic things that we see in Victorian literature and movies about boarding schools: violence, bullying, indifference in terms of education, his education, ill health, all sorts of things, completely at a distance from his family. And it caused him to be resentful of his mother in particular for decades. He eventually ends up in a school called Heatherdown Preparatory School, which, if you got there, meant that you got an automatic place into one of the top schools in the country, Eton. Unfortunately, by this time, David was a very, very difficult school pupil. He was always playing practical jokes to get the class to laugh at him. And some of those practical jokes the staff did not find amusing. At Heatherdown Preparatory School, for example, he became something of a legend when he got responsibility for, the boys were given all sorts of different tasks. He was given all sorts of responsibility for bellowing, working the bellows to the church organ at school. We've moved on to the next slide. I was going to say that, but I'll talk about the next slide in just a second. He was given responsibility for working the bellows of the church organ during a school service, and he worked it in such a way that it emanated a farting noise. And all sorts of pranks like that. There was another one where he was running in a school exercise, and he decided to stop, pull down his trousers, and moon his arse at the locals. So he was a fun child from our perspective. He was a difficult child if you were looking after him. And eventually he got expelled from Heatherdown, lost the place at Eton. His mother and stepfather didn't know what to do, so they tried to get him into Dartmouth Naval College. That didn't work because he failed the entrance exams, scratched their heads again, and found a school called Stowe, which was new and did things like call the boys by their first name and generally treat them with kindness. And suddenly he was able to flourish. And now we're getting on to the slide that we're on now, where he gets out from that school, he passes his exams, gets into Sandhurst, which is an officers' college, does extremely well, and becomes an officer. And he becomes an officer for a section of the army called the Highland Light Infantry, which in which he was, relatively successful, but it was not the unit that he wanted to be part of. Now, why was that? Well, he felt the Highland Light Infantry, the uniform was rubbish. He was very into what uniforms looked like. That was part of the aristocratic thing. There was very little overseas travel. There was no chance of adventure. And the Highland Light Infantry was known for bogging down your career. It was extremely difficult to get promoted. He had asked the War Office to be put into another regiment, which he thought was more glamorous, but they gave him the no-no. So he had to he had to participate or to live with this infantry regiment. And the thing that kept him going during that time was going on leave, going out, social events where he could, flashily show his uniform, meet all sorts of interesting people. And that he did. And the remarkable thing about David Niven is, even though he was a bit of a non-entity in some senses as a member of the aristocracy, he met so many major contacts in his early years, which propelled him towards Hollywood. So let's have a look at those contacts. That first picture is of him graduating from Sandhurst and eventually getting into the Highland Light Infantry. He's in the Highland Light Infantry's uniform, which he finds a bit boring. The second picture is of him with one of his best friends from the Highland Light Infantry, a gentleman called Trubshaw, who he would later help get a career in movies. And then here are 3 examples of the contacts he makes during his social life while he's on leave. He used to go to the theatre, he used to go to parties. And these are 3 examples of the people he met. On the end there in the square are Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and his son. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and his son. And bear with me, so I've got my names mixed up, but it's Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and his son were, the father was a huge silent movie star, and his son would have a major career in talking movies. And that gave David the first taste of what it was like to be a movie star: big houses, beautiful women, lots of money. He then used to go regularly to the theatre, and on one occasion he saw a beautiful blonde on the stage called Anne Todd, who would later become a major star, and he dated her for a while, and through her he met a lot of British actors, including Laurence Olivier. And the lady on the right, down at the bottom, looking rather beautiful, is Barbara Hutton, the multi-millionaire heiress to the Woolworths fortune, who was so taken by David at a social event that they met at that she gave him an all expenses paid holiday to America. He went to New York, he went to all sorts of places and discovered this wide open expanse of money, adventure, and lots of actors and others who were doing really, really well in America. I should have described the Fairbanks. I got them a bit mixed up. It's Douglas Fairbanks Sr., the one who's standing with the lighter coat, and Douglas Fairbanks Jr., major stars of their time, major Hollywood stars. Next slide, please. Now, having met the Fairbanks and having mingled with Anne Todd and Laurence Olivier and many others in the acting world, he starts to think about the movie world. And his first films, which the posters are shown on here, are films in which he appears as an extra. And these films, although he's a non-entity, he's just a dot in these films, they start to give him a taste of what film acting is like and what the rewards of film acting could be. So let's have a look. We've got There Goes the Bride, which is thought to be one. There's a lot of debate as to what his first films were, but these three are cited as probably the first films. There Goes the Bride, in which he was an extra, which starred the great musical star Jessie Matthews. You'll see that a picture of Valerie Hobson. She was in his second picture called Eyes of Fate, which was a fantasy quickie, a very short movie in which he was an extra in. And by the time he gets to America, which I'm going to tell you about a little more about, he appears as an extra, again, another dot, if you like, in Cleopatra, the 1934 big epic version directed by Cecil B. DeMille and starring Claudette Colbert. So he's a tiny, tiny dot in these films, but mingling with actors, mingling with the Fairbanks, and watching the world of film, it's an excitement that he wants to be part of. So let's have a look at the next slide. So he leaves the army, having had a all expenses paid trip to America through Barbara Hutton, having appeared as an extra in those first two of the three movies I just mentioned, and continually being bored to death by his career in the army. And despite resistance from his family, who said, "Why are you abandoning the army to become an actor? This is complete madness," he decides to go to America. Now, how he left the army, there are two stories, and one of the things about David Niven is he loved to gild the lily. The story that's probably true is that he simply resigned. The story that is often quoted, which is seen to be much more entertaining, is that he was sitting in a talk, he and the rest of the Highland Light Infantry, that was being given by a general about guns or marching or something equally boring. And it went on and on and on, and he was virtually falling asleep. When the general ended the talk, he said, "Does anybody have any questions?" And David Niven stood up and said, "Well, I have a question, sir. What time is it? Because I need to catch my train, because I've got a beautiful blonde that I'm going to be going out with, and I'm worried that I'm going to miss her and therefore miss a wonderful date." The general was not pleased. He ordered David to be arrested with a view to court-martial, but David charmed the person who was keeping him secure in the barracks. The guy let him out. He managed to leave the barracks and never came back again, and left the army. So, you know, that story is much more entertaining, but I suspect in the end, all he did was resign in the normal way in accordance with the army procedures. So he sets sail and goes to America. He gets some financial help from his stepfather, Coleman Platt, and there is talk that he used some of the inheritance he obtained from his mother, who died round about 1932-93. He gets on the ship. It goes to Canada and he lands in America. He works his way up to California. He has a brief job as a whiskey salesman. He later finds out that he was the worst whiskey salesman that they ever had. And he also does other odd jobs. The contacts he makes are absolutely incredible during this period. When you think of the struggles that other major stars had to get started, look at them there. Fred Astaire, Irving Thalberg, Fred Astaire's on the right, Irving Thalberg and his wife, Norma Shearer. Irving Thalberg was the head, or one of the heads, of the biggest studio, Hollywood studio, MGM. His wife was the biggest star of that studio. Loretta Young and her sister down at the bottom below those two. He stays as a lodger at Loretta Young's house. That's how he meets her for a brief while when he's looking for accommodation. Just beside the Thalbergs, Norma and Irving, with the penciled moustache, is the great British movie star, a previous generation to David, Ronald Coleman, who'd been successful in silent movies and was successful in talking movies. Just beside him, with his arms folded, is another member of what was called the Hollywood Raj, loads of British actors who kind of lived a very British club-like life, but appeared in tons of costume dramas, anything about, battles and literary adaptations that were British, they would appear in it. C. Aubrey Smith, and just below him is Cedric Hardwicke. Now, the person sort of in the middle underneath Ronald Coleman is the man that really launched David Niven's career. But before we get to him, one of the things that happened before he met this man is that by his own dint of charm and hard graft in terms of mingling with the Hollywood crowd that he could get access to, David was able to nearly get a part in a Mae West film. Mae West asked him, this was what the audition consisted of, to take off his shirt so that she can check him out to see if he had a good enough physique. He did, and she offered him the part and he accepted it. But just as he was about to register, do the necessary registration so he could start work, he received notification from the US immigration authorities that his visa had run out and he needed to regularize his position and he could not work. He had to leave America. He went over to Mexico, dug ditches for a while to keep himself alive, sorted out his immigration paperwork, came back, but the Mae West part had gone. But by this time, still was continuing to meet more and more people. He eventually met Edmund Goulding, and this is this gentleman just below Ronald. There's a hand going up just below Ronald. Nikki, do you want to ask me something? No, I saw a hand go up. Just below Ronald Coleman is Edmund Goulding. Goulding directed something like 16 or 17 films by this time, including Grand Hotel, which had Joan Crawford, Greta Garbo, and John Barrymore. So he was a big name. He took to David and he offered David a screen test. And that screen test led to David getting parts in other films, initially as a sort of prominent extra and eventually some main speaking parts. In terms of the audition itself, it's become famous because David, in the middle of it, decided to recite a dirty nursery rhyme. And I'll just read the rhyme out to you, just to show you how brave, confident, and reckless this guy could be. There was an old man of Leeds who swallowed a packet of seeds. Great tufts of grass shot out of his arse and his cock was all covered in weeds. So that gives you an example of David Niven, the man that even in some in highfalutin Hollywood auditioning circles, he had lots of cheek in him. Okay, so let's have a look at the next slide. The films that Goulding got him in, the first one was Mutiny on the Bounty, a huge seafaring epic with the King of Hollywood, Clark Gable, and Charles Laughton, who was considered the most respected actor of the time. This film was made in 1935. He also had a speaking part. This was what he graduated onto next in a classic film, it's classic today, called Dodsworth, which starred Walter Houston, and you'll see that he actually gets his face and name on the poster. And just below the Dodsworth poster is the picture of Sam Goldwyn, because Goldwyn, once he sees him in these two films, and he's very heavily influenced these two films, he was a major independent Hollywood producer, actually signs David up to a 7-year contract, starting off at $100 per week. Remember, this is the Depression era, and ultimately, if he stays the course, he was going to get $7,000+ per week. You'll see two other pictures there, because what happens once Goulding takes control of his career is that he becomes a lead actor in B movies and a supporting actor in A movies. The B movies were helping him to develop his film and acting skills and were building him up to major stardom. So eventually he would become an A-list actor. And the A movies were giving him, again, more promotion, more prominence, and getting him used to big scale epics. Because that was the image that it was thought that he fulfilled. One of the things I forgot to say is that when he registered with the casting agency, the central casting agency that actors or people who wanted to be actors were required to do, he was registered as an Anglo-Saxon type 2008. So this is when he kicked off his career and started doing extra work, because they used to classify you as a type. By the time he got to 1935, he was a really prominent Anglo-Saxon type, doing really, really well. And just below that, while all this was going on, he was dating the ladies. And one of his most famous dates at this time, quite a long relationship they had, was Merle Oberon, who was already a star. He was a rising star, but she was already a star in Britain and a star in Hollywood, who would make the great classic Wuthering Heights, which he would also appear in. I think she did want to marry him, but he wasn't the marrying kind at that time. So I think the next slide is a clip of the trailer of Mutiny on the Bounty, the scale of which it really encouraged David to say, this is great. He was a prominent extra in it. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a clip where you could easily see him, but you'll see Clark Gable, you'll see Charles Lawton really hamming it up. This is Hollywood at its absolute peak. And David, as a young starting actor, was watching it right at its heart. So if you could play that clip for me, that would be fantastic.
I've had enough of this bloodshed. He's the master of life and death on a quarterdeck above the angels. McCoy, Quill! I'm sick of blood. Bloody backs, bloody faces. Why are you giving an last command on this ship? We'll be men again if we hang for it.
Casting me adrift 3,500 miles from a port of call. You're sending me to my doom, eh? Well, you're wrong, Christian. I'll take this boat as she floats to England if I must. I'll live to see you, all of you, hanging from the highest yard arm in the British fleet.
Voyage of the Bounty.
If you could take me to the next slide, please. So that clip shows you what I think David Niven must have felt in being in the middle of that production, watching the big stars perform, hamming it up, lots of money, lots of glamour, a far cry from the Highland Light Infantry. And here's some posters of some of the A movies he appeared in, mainly as a supporting actor, but building on this experience of glamour, of Hollywood at its peak, huge productions, particularly about British, particularly in relation to literary adaptations, British high adventure. The Americans really admired the imperial sort of historical background of the British stories, and made lots of films about them. So let's have a look at the most famous. Errol, Flynn and Olivia de Havilland. David was a supporting actor in the film The Charge of the Light Brigade, directed by Michael Curtiz, released in 1936. A big Warner Brothers production. Errol Flynn was a massive star at this time, swashbuckling himself away, and it tells in its own Hollywood way the story of the great charge made by the British Light Cavalry in the Crimean War. None of these films pretend to be historically accurate, but it's all about entertaining the crowds. The Dawn Patrol, made in 1938, which is all about aviation fighters, British flyers fighting for their country in World War I. Lots of drama, lots of adventure, lots of special effects. Flynn, Niven, Basil Rathbone looking happy, looking handsome. They did occasionally look happy, you'll see a clip in a second, but facing, great danger. It's war and you may die tomorrow, and I'll talk about that in the clip that we're going to show next. The Prisoner of Zender, starring Ronald Coleman, again, David Niven, a great adventure movie which has been remade several times. And interestingly, Wuthering Heights, the first three movies I've mentioned, he has to act a bit, but a lot of it is sort of a lot of British upper lip officer type behavior, which I doubt stretched him much. But in Wuthering Heights, he is the third wheel in this dramatic Emily Bronte story about the love story of Heathcliff and Cathy. He's the one who marries Cathy, and it tries to be the one that makes everybody happy. And he has to give a very tender and feeling performance, while Merle Oberon and Laurence Olivier are really going at it in terms of emotion. And it really is quite a very impressive performance up against those two major stars. Now, the next clip that's coming up next is from Dawn Patrol. Because by this time, Niven and Flynn are very good friends, and they're actually living together in Hollywood. And they're seen as, Flynn in particular is a major star. Niven is seen also as his cohort. They have lots of fun, lots of ladies that they're with. But in Dawn Patrol, this clip typically shows the sort of supporting role that David Niven played in these A movies. He was a best friend. He would often provide comic relief. And he would be good looking, but not as good looking as the main guy. In this clip, he has been shot down by a German officer but survived. The German officer has been captured and is a prisoner. But in keeping with some of the themes in the film, where the aviators know that any minute now, they'll go on a mission tomorrow, they may die, when they are off, in their off time, in their downtime, they live wild, they live for fun, they try to enjoy themselves because they feel that tomorrow they may die at any moment. And they bring, in this particular clip, part of the film, the German officer is actually brought in to help with the entertainment. So could you play this clip for me? Thanks.
And the stretcher bearer pouring some rum down my throat. Oh, you should have some of that rum.
You didn't have any, did you?
Oh, no. Just a couple of drops, but I stopped for some refreshment on the way back, and I brought these.
Whoa.
Come on. Whoa, open them up. Whoa, open them up. Whoa, open them up. Whoa, whoa. What's that?
Oh, well, that's the man that brought you down.
Who?
Introduce him, will you, Phelps?
Das ist der Herr, den Sie Herr untergebracht haben.
Der Herr untergebracht habe?
Ja?
Ja.
Oh! Oh! Das wäre ganz großes Vergnügen. Das freut mich aber sehr. Du bist mein Freund. Verstehst du? Du bist mein Freund.
What's he say?
Yes,
I don't know.
Freund.
He just wants him to have a drink.
Oh, drink. Drink. What? Drinks.
Whoop, whoop, free.
Don't waste it.
Kameraden, Waffengegner, Freunde. Die Tatsache, dass wir Feinde sind, heißt nicht, dass wir uns persönlich hassen müssen. Absolut nicht. Es wäre im Sport. Wir tun unsere Pflicht als Soldaten. Das ist klar. Aber deshalb können wir nette Kerle sein, die sich gern haben. Es soll uns nicht hindern, dass wir bei einer Gelegenheit wie dieser uns hochleben lassen. Hoch! Hoch! Hoch!
Oh, didn't understand a word, did you?
No, I took German in school, but I...
So did I, but I can't understand the way these foreigners speak it.
Ho, ho. Thanks, old man.
Hoch. Auf das Wohl der Frau Gemahlin und Familie.
Beg your pardon, sir. There's a driver out here named Flaherty. He said he's waiting for you, sir.
Oh, tell him to wait. I've got a car and chauffeur outside. What? Car and chauffeur going to take me on a personally conducted tour of all the inns and taverns of France. Wonderful. You want to come, Fritzy?
Ich verstehe, was du sagst, da ich tue, was du willst.
Yeah. Gentlemen, keep the war going, please. We are going out to roll in a few gutters.
Whoa! Flaherty, where's my horse? Bring horse. Well, get the horse. Come on.
What? He can't go. He's a prisoner.
Oh, what are you talking
Oh, but he
about?
can sing.
Oh, well, goodbye, Fritzy. Goodbye. Come on, you love me. Goodbye. Come on, get in. This is Mr. Courtney, Mr. Flaherty. Best singer, best driver on the Western Front. Best, give us thumb and apple.
Captain, the singer,
Oh,
too.
he's terrific. Me.
Plum and apple, apple and plum, plum and apple, we have always done. Whoa, yes, we have lots of tea and others of rum, and all the way for the butcher is apple and plum.
Bring him in. I want to talk to him.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So if I could have the next slide, just you get the feeling that Dave Niven didn't necessarily find that scene too difficult to play, given the hijinks that Flynn and him used to get up to in private life. Okay, so David's career is going really well, and it's only a matter of time before he's probably going to be put into a big A movie himself as the lead. But everything changes on the 3rd of September 1939 when Neville Chamberlain, the picture just up there with the big microphone, the Prime Minister of Britain, declares that Britain is at war with Germany. The war had been building up for some time, and Britain had tried to keep out of it, but found themselves inevitably forced to participate. And without any hesitation whatsoever, David Niven cordially terminates his contract with Sam Goldwyn, abandons his career, goes home and re-enlists in the army, and provides exemplary service throughout the period throughout the war. And the significance of this decision, the courage of this decision, the amazingness of this decision is reflected in the different decisions that other people made in Hollywood during wartime. Some of them the same, some of them highly controversial. So let me just take you through what other people did. Clark Gable and James Stewart on the right, Clark Gable just below Errol Flynn, and James Stewart on the right there down the bottom, both fought in the war. They entered the US Aviation and Bombing Service that actually flew bomber missions and fought in the war for their country. John Mills, the very tiny picture at the bottom, symbolic of many British actors who were present in Britain at the time, enlisted and fought for his country. And then we get on to slightly more controversial fare. So I'm going to jump to Cary Grant, who's under Maurice Chevalier. As far as I'm aware, and I'm happy to be corrected, Cary Grant didn't actually fight in the war for Britain, but he did raise lots and lots of money to help the British Armed Forces and to help in terms of feeding Britain when it was really under the cosh and close to starvation. And he also did a lot of propaganda, provided a lot of propaganda help for the country, for the Allies, but I'm not aware he fought, but I stand corrected if others know better. Then we get on to the controversial people. Maurice Chevalier, although loved in France and in Hollywood, his reputation, perhaps unfairly, was slightly tinged by the fact that he stayed in occupied France during the occupation by the Germans or the Nazis, and it is claimed that he did actually entertain the Nazis, and this was considered by some people to be collaboration. It is claimed that Chevalier had, from the Chevalier's perspective, he didn't want to abandon his family in France, and I think he had a Jewish wife and he didn't want to abandon her. So he had a defense, he feels, to these allegations, but his reputation was somewhat tarnished by his period in occupied France. The young man right in the middle with the sweet little smile is Louis, who appeared in All Quiet on the Western Front, Louis Milestone's sort of talky, silent masterpiece, which was anti-war from a German perspective, but could be applied to any part of any protagonist in the war. And he became a pacifist. And it tarnished his career. It was able to resume post the end of World War I, but for a long time he was persona non grata with the powers that be at Hollywood. And controversy of controversies, the two most controversial, John Wayne, who, as far as I'm aware, did not fight in the war. He did a lot of propaganda. He did some entertainment for the troops. But one of the most controversial periods of Wayne's life is the fact that he did not engage in any military service during World War II. To his defense, when the war started, he was classified as someone who need not enlist because he was a father of a certain age with young children, and the first people who were required to enlist were men who were single without children or family. But that changed over the years, and it's not really been fully explained why he didn't fight in the war. There's all sorts of different stories for and against him. And Errol Flynn, the other thing about John Wayne is that the fact he didn't fight in the war didn't actually affect his career in any way. In contrast, Errol Flynn also didn't fight in the war. It is said by those sympathetic to him that he attempted to enlist, but no one would accept him because his health, he lived such a hedonistic lifestyle before and during his Hollywood career. He had TB, he had VD, he had malaria, all sorts of things. And his body was a total wreck. The problem for him, and therefore he couldn't pass any of the medical tests, the problem for him is that the public didn't know that. What they saw was a virile, swashbuckling hero, and they simply couldn't understand why this guy wasn't actually fighting for his country. So Flynn's career was damaged by his lack of military service. You'll see a picture there of David Niven with one of his commanders. Just below, the other significant part of this period of his life is that he got married. He married the woman who would become the love of his life, Primo Rollo, who was linked to Scottish and English aristocracy in Britain in 1940. He barely arrived to re-enlist in service, and he had two beautiful children. So he had a very, very active war, and he did intelligence services, he did active, he actually fought in the war, so faced danger, and he appeared in a lot of propaganda movies. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Here's a picture of, someone's found this picture of David Niven marrying his first wife. It's only 11 seconds, but it's very sweet. Could you play that for me, please? So very typical. They married within a few weeks of meeting each other. It was so typical of the war. People didn't know whether they were going to live or die, and romances and courtships speeded up to full-time marriage because you could die tomorrow. So they were very, very happy. Okay, so fighting Hitler, movie propaganda, the war is over, back to Hollywood. These are three films, propaganda films, if you like, that he appeared in during the war and just after. 1942, the first of the few, which was the Leslie Howard. Leslie Howard was a major star at that time. You can, if you want to see him in his full glory, have a look at Gone with the Wind. He's the Ashley character that Vivian Leigh keeps mooning over. It's the story of R.J. Mitchell, the designer of the Spitfire. That was made in 1942, and David has a prominent part in that. 1944 is the film The Way Ahead, about a collection of disparate British characters of all classes and creeds, who at first look as if they're going to be hopeless in terms of fighting the enemy, but become an efficient fighting unit led by David Niven's officer, a symbol of what Britain joining together, all parts, all classes, to fight the Nazis. And 1945, and we'll talk about this film a little later, A Matter of Life and Death, the Powell and Pressburger fantasy, in which David Niven plays a pilot who is facing a near-death experience. His opposite lead is Kim Hunter. I'll talk about that a bit later. Let's have a look at a clip from The Way Ahead. That's the next slide.
We ought to have dug trenches at Dunkirk, let the Germans through, then taken them in the rear.
What can you do with a rifle against a tank?
Oh, we had our troubles in the Sudan and in Basutoland. We got through all right. The dogs always do.
What was you in?
The dogs. DOGs, Duke of Glendon's light infantry. You ought to know that, young fella. What you in?
Parachutes.
Oh, the umbrella danglers.
Who does your marching for you?
I don't doubt they could have done with us in Greece.
Yeah, there's another bungled engagement for you. Surrounded, all right. Form square, same as what old General McNeil did at Suakin. You'll be too old to remember that.
Times have changed, Dad.
He's right, Bobby. I don't doubt they use bayonets nowadays, the like of which we've never seen. Great long beggars.
No, nothing's changed. Except that life's much easier than it used to be. Now, all them battle courses, a lot of nonsense. Anything to get out of marching, cushy compared with what we had to do. Up to our knees in water to cross a stream. No time to take your boots off. No joke it was. Nowadays, they're afraid of getting their feet wet. Might get in a draft and catch cold. A lot of nonsense. One sergeant we had used to shout and scream just to make it sound like a real battle. Wouldn't like that sort of caper nowadays. They're too worried about them fancy battle suits of theirs, these young fellas. Keeping a nice crease in their trousers to go out with a girl. No buttons to clean like we had. They don't know what polishing is. And another thing. We didn't get broke off for a cup of tea every 5 minutes like they do now. We had to keep on marching, dressing properly by the right, with bayonets gleaming and everything. Looked lovely, it did. Didn't feel so lovely, though. No joke when you've got sopping wet feet and the sergeant's got his eye on you, especially when it's hot. Didn't have no feelings, those old sergeants. No taking it easy with them. Left, right, and to watch your step you did. And if you made a mistake in the drill, you all had to go back and do it again. Much easier. I don't know why they don't call some of us up. Some of the old dogs. We'd show them.
No need to, Dad. Look, big new call-up.
Fat lot of good that'll do. Right back.
One of them gone anyway.
Come on, lads. Once more for the day you missed on the exercise.
Great stuff. So a classic British movie encouraging the British public to, particularly the men, to enlist. And no matter who you are, you're going to help win the war, especially if you've got David Niven leading you in training and leading you on the real battlefront. So what happens next? Well, the war ends, Britain and the Allied forces win. David's done his job. and he decides to go back to America and resume his Hollywood career. He does so easily. Goldwyn, who had always been fond of him and admired his decision to go back to Britain, re-signs him on to a fresh contract where he's getting $3,000 per week, which will go up and up and up. And he loves the fact that David is married with 2 beautiful sons, and it all is starting off swimmingly well post the war. He makes a number of successful films, including The Bishop's Wife in 1947, in which he appears as a bishop who is having a spiritual crisis and also a crisis in his marriage. And Cary Grant comes along as an angel to save both things. But as things progress, Niven starts to have doubts about his career. He doesn't feel he's getting enough money. He doesn't feel he's getting really good parts. And his relationship with Goldwyn slowly but surely starts to deteriorate. Also at this time, he suffers probably, I won't say it's the worst of the tragedies that affect him, because losing your father, your mother, and so forth in the circumstances that he did wasn't necessarily good. But in 1946, his wife, Primi Rollo, who came with him to America, they were settling down, they were getting into the Hollywood social scene and having a great time, died in a tragic accident. They were attending a party at Tyrone Power's house, and they decided to have a hide and seek game. While the seeker was looking for everybody, Primi opened a door which she thought was a cupboard that she could hide in. She did not understand the construction of large American homes, and that in fact she was opening the door to a steep basement, a steep stairs and a steep basement. She fell head down, crashed her head and other parts of her body. I think it was about 20 or 30 feet, something like that. She didn't die immediately, but after a while in hospital, she did die, leaving David a widower with 2 young sons, and he was very, very devastated. About 2 years later, I'm sorry, he married a Swedish supermodel, my apologies for this rubbish pronunciation, Hårdjustice Tears-Moden, aged 28 in London. And initially their marriage was very successful, but it was a very up and down affair. And by the end, it wasn't so happy, but they stuck together till the day he died. But his relationship with Goldwyn just went down and down and down, and it culminated in a complete fallout as a result of his participation in 2 films that Goldwyn compelled him under contractual conditions to participate in. The first, which you'll see a picture of on the left there, is the Bonnie Prince Charlie film, which was made in 1948. Niven hated it. It was filmed in Scotland. He was required to dye his hair blonde. As far as he was concerned, put himself in ridiculous costumes and shave off his moustache, which he found the most unbearable. He didn't think he was being paid properly. He didn't think he was getting the proper benefits. He should have been put in better hotels. He hated the fact that he was away from his wife and 2 children for such long periods, and he thought the script was rubbish. He was then required by Goldwyn to appear in The Elusive Pimpernel, a remake of a Leslie Howard classic, and he appeared opposite Margaret Leighton. Same complaints. It was filmed in parts of Europe and Britain, and the not emails in those days, but telegrams and letters between Goldwyn and Niven were, pretty vitriolic and angry. And in the end, their relationship completely terminated by 1950. Now, he then had a very fallow period where it was known in Hollywood that Goldwyn, who had really helped to make him and build his career, it was felt at one stage that Niven had become a rather spoilt Hollywood actor, making all sorts of demands and overrating himself. But through his charm, through his ability to get people to warm to him, that fallow period was very, very brief. And really, as an independent actor, his career started to really soar to international stardom. So let's go on to the next slide, please. I'm going to show you two clips which tell you that by the mid to late 50s, David Niven was a massive international A-list star. The first film clip is from a film called Separate Tables, made in 1958, in which he won a Best Actor Oscar. He plays a retired English major who lives with a number of other disparate characters in a hotel in Britain, and he is your stiff upper lip, noble, brave major who talks about his war exploits and gives the impression that he's quite something. Scandal happens during the course of the narrative, which shows that in fact the major is a fraud, nothing he said is true, and he's rather a pathetic individual. The scandal spreads into the hotel, and a number of people have demanded that he leave because of the disgrace. So here he is trying to make an exit, a quiet exit in disgrace. He's in this scene with Wendy Hiller, who's the hotel manager, who is sympathetic towards him, and he's trying to make arrangements to leave. And this is David Niven, a quintessential opposite character from what we usually see. And it's a fantastic performance. If you could just play this clip for me, please.
Now, what can I do for you, Major?
It's just, if you don't mind, to get my bill ready.
I want to make it perfectly plain, Major. There's no question whatever of my asking you to leave this hotel. If you wish to stay, you're at perfect liberty to do so.
Well, that's very good of you, but of course I have to go.
Very well.
I'll send you a forwarding address when I get something fixed. I hate to bring this up, but would you mind very much if I hid here in your office when I bring my bags down? I don't awfully want to.
Of course.
And thank you for being so kind. God knows I don't deserve it, but I'm very grateful.
I do wish you'd change your mind.
Miss Cooper, the plain fact is that I'm far too much of a coward to stay on here now.
At least you wouldn't be forced into any more of that major stuff, would you?
Well, I might be forced into something a good deal more conclusive. Cleaning the old service revolver, perhaps. Make a nasty mess on one of your carpets and bring an ugly scandal into your hotel.
I'd take the risk if you would.
You're thinking of Sybil, of course.
Sybil, too, yes.
Not a hope. Not a hope in the whole blinking wide world. I know my form, you see. Still, that is the part about it that I hate the most. She's distinctly an odd one. Almost a case, mind of a child and all that. And yet she means quite a lot to me.
I rather think you mean a lot to her, too.
I would like to think so. You know, one's awfully apt to try and excuse oneself sometimes by saying, well, what I do doesn't do anybody else much harm. But one does, you see. It's not a thought that I like very much. Well, mustn't miss the old train, what? What? I must stop saying what. Cherry bye. Better stop doing that too, I suppose.
Fantastic stuff. And I'm going to show you the next clip, which is, by this time, David Niven is earning 30 grand per film, which would be $500,000 today. He's an A-list star. He's appearing in all these big, epic movies with multiple stars, fighting where the studios, the dying studios, because the Hollywood studios were dying by the 50s and 60s, were trying to fight off television. And in The Guns of Navarone, a great war adventure movie, he's there with Gregory Peck, Anthony Quinn, James Darren, a whole Stanley Baker, a whole range of stars. In this scene, because it's a group of men who are undertaking a really dangerous mission to destroy a set of German guns in Navarone that have been causing a lot of problems for the Allies. it's it's a really dangerous mission. And Niven cannot stand the leader of the group, Gregory Peck, who is stiff upper lip, making all sorts of ruthless decisions. And now the group must decide whether they're going to kill a young woman who they've discovered is a spy in their midst. This is the angry Niven. This is the Niven who was probably like this at boarding school because he was sent to boarding school away from his parents. This is the Niven saying, I'm fed up with this stiff upper lip rubbish. I'm fed up with being treated badly. I hate the war, and I'm fed up with you, Gregory Peck. You're tall, you know what. So let's have a look at David Niven really going at Gregory Peck in this scene.
But aren't you forgetting something, Captain? The lady. As I see it, we have three choices. One, we can leave her here, but there's no guarantee she won't be found. And in her case, they won't need a truth drug. Two, we could take her with us, but that would just make things a lot more difficult than they are already. And three, well, that's Andrea's choice, remember?
You really want your pound of flesh, don't you?
Yes. Yes, I do. You see, somehow I just couldn't manage to get off to sleep last night.
If you're so anxious to kill her, go ahead.
Oh, I'm not anxious to kill her. I'm not anxious to kill anyone. See, I'm not a born soldier. I got trapped. You may find me facetious from time to time, but if I didn't make some rather bad jokes every now and then, I'd go out of my mind. No, I prefer to leave the killing to someone like you. An officer and a gentleman. A leader of men. A hero.
You think that I enjoy this any of it? You're out of your mind. I never wanted it. I was trapped into it just like you, just like anybody else in a uniform.
Of course you wanted it. You're an officer, aren't you? I never let them make me an officer. I don't want the responsibility for anything.
Then you had a free ride. All this time. Someone's got to take the responsibility if the job's going to get done. You think that's easy?
I don't know. I'm beginning to wonder who really is responsible when it comes to the dirty work. Who really is guilty? The man who gives the order or the one who has to do it with his own hands?
Ain't no time for this.
Now, just a minute. If we're going to get this job done, she has got to be killed. And we all know how keen you are on getting the job done. Now, I can't speak for the others, but I've never killed a woman before, traitor or not, and I'm finicky. So why don't you do it? Why don't you let us off for once? Come on, be a pal, be a father to your men. Come down off that cross of yours, close your eyes, think of England, and pull the trigger. What do you say, sir?
There you go. It's the ladies who always have to make the decisions while the guys are arguing. Next slide, please. So by the late 60s, by the 60s, David is an international movie star, appearing in all sorts of wonderful films. And here's an example of three of them. 55 Days at Peking, one of these big Charlton Heston type epics about the Boxer Rebellion, and he plays the British governor diplomat standing firm against the China's Boxer Rebellion. There's Ava Gardner and Charlton Heston. He's right up there with them, looking butch and movie star-like, directed by Nicholas Ray, and I think it's one of Nicholas Ray's last movies. Casino Royale has become a classic. It's a satire of the James Bond stories. And I understand that in real life, Ian Fleming, who wrote James Bond, actually thought that actually had David Niven as a real candidate to actually be James Bond in one of the serious productions, but it never happened. Sean Connery got the part. We've also got Pink Panther, that great farce, great comedy starring Peter Sellers, but also David Niven playing a very distinguished cat burglar in that film. 4-Star, that's the logo of a TV production company that David and a number of other major stars, Dick Powell, Ida Lupino, and Charles Boyer, invested in, which created half-hour TV plays and other programs, some of the major TV series like Barbara Stanwyck's Big Valley Western. And that made tons and tons of money. David Niven and those others were some of the few Hollywood stars who took television seriously. They weren't snobby about it. And they actually participated in some of these plays. And that really pushed up David's prestige even more, made him a multimillionaire, and eventually he would move to Switzerland, partly to avoid the taxes and partly to live in a beautiful chateau in Switzerland with his family. Let's move to the next slide, please. His career continued. The films weren't actually as good as they had been up to the 60s, but he continued to make films. And one of his last real film successes was a movie made in 1980 called The Sea Wolves, in which every single possible British actor you could possibly think of a certain generation appeared. It was about a generation of elderly men who'd been in a light infantry regiment in World War I, and they were asked to unite again and participate in a dangerous mission in World War II, led of course by Gregory Peck and Roger Moore, and it was a very successful film. David Niven played the part of the leader of the regiment. Wonderful film, very successful, and part of a sort of series of, my brother calls them old geezer films. The other film was The Wild Geese with Richard Burton and Richard Harris, that was made around about the late 70s, early 80s. He also became, by this time, a really consummate writer. He wrote 2 hugely successful Hollywood books, one majorly about his life and one more about the industry, Bring on the Empty Horses and The Moon's Balloon. If you've never read them, you must, because they are so entertaining. Whether some of it is true is another matter, because he was known for gilding the lily about his own life and about the lives of others, but nevertheless, wonderful. He talks about his life with Errol Flynn and many of the other major stars that he encountered. On to the next slide, please. So we're coming almost to the end. There's one more clip to follow. He continues to write, he continues to appear in films, and because of the success of his books, he does a lot of talk shows. Those of you who are as old as I am, I'm sure you can remember David Niven's wonderful appearances on the Parkinson Show. That was one of the big talk shows of the 70s and early 80s. But all good things must come to an end. By about 1981, sadly, he was diagnosed with a motor neuron disease type illness, which started to affect his ability to perform on films. He became almost inaudible, and many of his later films had to be dubbed. And then eventually it affected him in other physical ways. And in 1983, David Niven, the great actor, the great British performer, Hollywood star, died in Switzerland. Now, the last clip that I'm going to show you, and my apologies for overrunning, the last clip that I'm going to show you comes from the film A Matter of Life and Death, the great Powell and Pressburger fantasy classic. This scene is a scene where he is a pilot in a plane that is about to crash. These are his last moments. He's talking to the radio operator in Britain, Kim Hunter, and he's having what he thinks is his last conversation before he dies. The big question in the movie, because it's a fantasy movie, is will he die or won't he die? But for the moment, this is going to be his last moments. And this is David Niven at his absolute supreme peak. very sad. Note the reference to his mother and his two sisters, bringing in some real life stuff from his own life into this wonderful scene, which for many British people at this time had some sense of reality in terms of their war experience. So if you could play that clip for me, thank you.
Oh, gee, George, are you all right? Are you going to try to land? Do you want to fix?
The name's not G. George, it's Peter. Peter D. Carter. D's for David. Squadron leader Peter Carter. No, I'm not going to land. Undercarriage is gone. Inner port's on fire. I'm bailing out presently. I'm bailing out. Take a telegram.
Got your message. Received your message. We can hear you.
Telegram to my mother. Mrs. Michael Carter, 88 Hampstead Lane, London, Northwest.
88 Hampstead Lane, London.
Tell her that I love her. You'll have to write this for me, but what I want her to know is that I love her very much. That I've never shown it to her, not really, but that I've loved her always, right up to the end. Give my love to my two sisters, too. Don't forget them.
Received your message. We can hear you. Are you wounded? Repeat, are you wounded? Are you bailing out?
What's your name?
June.
Yes, June, I'm bailing out. I'm bailing out, but there's a catch. I've got no parachute.
Hello, Peter, do not understand. Hello, Peter, can you hear me?
Hello, June. Don't be afraid. It's quite simple. We've had it, and I'd rather jump than fry. After the first 1,000 feet, what's the difference? I shan't know anything anyway. I say, I hope I haven't frightened you.
No, I'm not frightened.
Good girl.
You sparked. You said he was dead. Hasn't he got a shoot?
Cut the ribbons, cannon shell. June, are you pretty?
Not bad.
Can you hear me as well as I hear you?
Yes.
You've got a good voice. You've got guts, too. It's funny, I've known dozens of girls. I've been in love with some of them, but an American girl whom I've never seen and who I never shall see will hear my last words. That's funny. It's rather sweet. June, if you're around when they pick me up, turn your head away.
Perhaps we can do something, Peter. Let me report it.
No, no one can help. Only you. Let me do this in my own way. I want to be alone with you, June. Where were you born?
Boston.
Mass?
Yes.
That's a place to be born. History was made there. Are you in love with anybody? No, don't answer that.
I could love a man like you, Peter.
I love you, June. Your life, and I'm leaving you. Where do you live? On the station?
No, in a big country house about 5 miles from here. Lee Wood House.
Old house?
Yes, very old.
Good. I'll be a ghost and come and see you. You're not frightened of ghosts, are you? It'll be awful if you were.
I'm not frightened.
What time will you be home?
Well, I'm on duty till 6. I have breakfast in a mess, and then I have to cycle half an hour. I often go along the sands. Such nonsense.
No, it's not. It's the best sense I ever heard. I was lucky to get you, June. Can't be helped about the parachute. I'll have my wings soon anyway, big white ones. I hope they haven't got all modern. I'd hate to have a prop instead of wings. What do you think the next world's like? I got my own ideas.
Peter.
I think it starts where this one leaves off, or where this one could leave off if we'd listened to Plato and Aristotle and Jesus. With all our little earthly problems solved, but with greater ones worth the solving. I'll know soon enough anyway. I'm signing off now, June. Goodbye. Goodbye, June.
Hello, G for George. Hello, G. George. Hello, G. George. Hello.
So long, Bob. I'll see you in a minute. You know what we wear by now, a prop or wings.
Fantastic stuff. So much going on in that scene. So that's it. The one other thing I was going to say is that in one of my slides, I think the one just before, you'll see a logo of Talking Pictures TV. There it is. If anybody's interested in being a reviewer, if you tap in Talking Pictures TV podcast in your search box, you'll pick up the website. There's an email address. They'll tell you how to do the reviews, because their podcast is all about fans talking about what films they love. So if you're interested, and they do need reviewers, do go into the Talking Pictures website. That was it, really. That's it. The great David Niven.
Thank you. That was brilliant. It's quite long, but I'm sure no one minds that. We've probably got time for...
My apologies for overrunning everybody.
No problem at all. We've got time for, if you don't mind, for just 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah.
Just before we go on to questions, I'll just do a plug for the fact that tomorrow we have a talk on the World Trade Center by a really brilliant architectural historian from New York, Anthony Robbins. He's really worth seeing. And next week, 30th of September, we have Ben Aronovich, who's going to be talking about the fact it's 10 years since the Rivers of London book started being published. And our next film talk is on the 6th of October, so it's a couple of weeks away, and it's rather provocatively called The Most Boring Film in the World. So you have to tune in to find out exactly what that's about. Okay. Lots of people saying how good it was. So
thank you so much. Thanks, thanks for sitting around waiting for it to finish, because I
we'll just go to some of the questions. Hold on. Right. Excuse me. Okay, a couple of people at the beginning asked, one of them, Vienna, who has a really good blog I can recommend, Vienna's Classic Hollywood, asked, did he have any acting training?
Not as far as I'm aware. The training that he had in terms of acting was really when he was signed up by Goldwyn. And once you were signed up by a Hollywood studio or a producer, a major producer, that's when you got film training. And you were sent to classes to learn how to, you know, do actor fighting and emote and Shakespeare and move and dance and ballet and all sorts of things. But he didn't have any as far as I'm aware, he didn't have any formal training, active training at all. So yeah, he was probably a natural in some ways.
But I guess that was more common in those days, because quite a few people like Gary Cooper, I think, just moved up the
Yeah, I mean, Hollywood gets two categories of actors. It gets people who come through the theatre, or it gets people who come from nowhere. And he was the sort of nowhere person.
And they were, specifically in the early sound days, they did like a British accent, didn't they?
Yes, they loved it. And they loved all those epic movies of British Imperial, this, that, and the other.
Yes, I mean, Alan has slightly controversially asked, but he asked this at the beginning, and I suspect he may have had his answer by the end. Was Niven's success in films due to his social climbing skills rather than his acting skills?
A bit, I suspect. I mean, being a gentleman and an officer and all that sort of thing, and getting those connections with the Hollywood Raj. Yes, I'm sure that helped. But a lot of British people of various social standing and so forth went to America and didn't succeed. Yes, I think the contacts and his aristocratic bearing and so on helped him. But to sustain a Hollywood career is as difficult as to getting one, I think. And he managed to keep going and keep. And I think, you know, I don't think that. I think he actually had talent, and that really helped him.
I was discussing this earlier with Simone. Quite a lot of his Goldwyn films are on Amazon Prime. A lot of them are free. Yes. Although I think the way Amazon Prime works is if several of you go and watch it, then they'll start charging, so take it easy. But so his early films has to be said, he's not very good in some of his early films. I mean,
yeah.
He himself said that his part in Wuthering Heights is pretty impossible. So,
but I looked at it again today, and I didn't think his performance was too bad, and I felt it held up against Olivia and Merle Oberon. But yeah, he's learning as he goes. That's what happens. You're learning, and you get better and better until you get to a separate tables kind of ascendancy, where you really know what you're doing.
It is very, I mean, I don't know what Goldwyn had lined up for him, because he did literally join up like the day war was declared. He didn't wait. So he must have had films lined up. And I don't know what that was, because as you say, he was starting to play leads in kind of B films like that.
I don't know what the films were that were lined up, but I think it would have been a natural step to go to lead actor. The way he was going, it did look as if he was on his way to being an A star.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, it is interesting to think what his career would have been. There's quite a few people sort of mentioning other people who had interesting careers during the war, like Hedy Lamarr and things. I mean, one thing I did know is he never quite he always hated Rex Harrison, didn't he? He had this real thing about Rex
that
Harrison.
whole period of what did you do during the war, Daddy, is a big question for those in film and Hollywood, particularly British and European performers. And different people took different decisions. And apparently he did not like Rex Harrison because it's alleged that Harrison did not join up immediately. Although not many people actually did like Rex Harrison for other reasons. So, everybody's got their own story. A lot of British and American stars were told by the powerful and the politicians and so on, actually don't join up. We need you to make propaganda films. That's what delayed Laurence Olivier for a while. He was told to do propaganda films. And after a while, he said, hang on a minute, this isn't working. I need to join up and fight for my country. So there are different stories as to why people didn't.
I know the American Air Force didn't really want Clark Gable, did they?
They didn't. He really had to persist. Jimmy Stewart was rejected because he was too skinny at one point.
Although he was actually a pilot, wasn't he?
He was, So it's interesting.
There's a bit of discussion about separate tables and how brilliant the Vatican's script is, and how completely out of how out of character it is. I mean, I don't know how much it's deliberate kind of Oscar bait. I don't think it was quite so obvious in those days. You do something out of character and you get it.
I mean, he thought he couldn't do it. He was offered the part and he said, no way, this is too serious. This is proper acting. I can't do this. And he was persuaded to do it. And he just did a fantastic performance. I think because he really understood it was a quintessential type of British character, someone boasting about the war and their past. And actually all of it's a lie. So he obviously encountered some of these people and kind of knew their nuances and the way they behaved.
Melissa's asked about a story which I'm afraid I don't know. Read the War Years. I'm hoping the story about his covering for Peter Ustinov writing The Way Ahead in Army Time is true. I know that Peter Ustinov was his Batman for a while.
He was, it was the only way they could work together because of all this English class system and officer.
Oh right, because Ustinov was private,
So I think they did know each other, and I think they pretended that Ustinov was his Batman so that they could work together on various things, and they became lifelong friends, I think.
Melissa has also pointed out, and this is worth saying, that quite a lot of his television turns up on Talking Pictures TV.
It does,
It's like the Rogues they've been showing, haven't they, in Turn of Fate. So you can see him.
There's lots and lots of 4-star production, half-hour performances and stuff, and it's really great stuff, and it's a reflection of the early days of American television.
Well, as you said, I mean, they all pretty well, every film star was desperate to be a success on television, but not that many of them actually succeeded. I mean,
eventually some of them were quite snobby about it. Clark Gable was snobby about it and then decided he was going to do it, but before he could do it, he died. But some of them, a lot of them didn't succeed on television.
Like Betty Davis
for example, she was terrible.
Betty Davis did loads of pilots, and quite a lot of them did. James Stewart did some series where I think he's like a college professor, widow college professor, didn't succeed. Alice has said, and I'm not a James Bond expert, so I'm assuming this is in the book, not the film, that apparently Ian Fleming has Kissy Suzuki in You Only Live Twice say that David Niven was the only person in Hollywood who'd been kind to her. Now, I'm assuming that's in the book.
Interesting. I don't know.
If it's in the film, I apologise. I'm not kind of a James Bond person, so it's
that's I don't know.
That he's being mentioned and it's taken for granted that he's a nice guy.
It is. I mean, the marriage to his second wife was very up and down, and she, the sort of standard stereotype is that she was a difficult person and he was a nice guy. But there's a book called by Graham Lorwood called Niv, which attempts to give both sides of the story. There's also a website in her name written by someone who it's quite detailed. I'll send the link to Nikki if people are interested, which gives a different perspective on his second wife. But you know, who knows, you know, only the two people that are in the relationship know the truth. So, you know,
David Hilton asked, what do we know what went wrong with him and Goldwyn? Because I know that, I mean, Niven kind of says that he behaved quite badly, doesn't he?
It's the standard pattern with Hollywood stars. They rise up and they're very grateful for what they're getting initially. And then what they feel is that they're being stereotyped and they can't spread their wings. That then leads to concerns about money, because people like Goldwyn and many agents and managers were getting 10%, 20% out of your salary. So that starts to cause resentment. And then you find out what people like Goldwyn are really earning out of what you're earning. And that starts to, so it was money. It was also, Niven was very angry about the quality of the parts he was getting. He felt that he was stuck in this dreadful costume drama, two of them, where he was wearing sort of silly costumes with crap scripts, and this was going to ruin his career. And also he wanted an easier life. He didn't want to be making 4, 5, 6 movies a year, far away from his wife and kids. So it was a combination of factors, but very, very Hollywood, that the star becomes more discontented, wants more money, wants better parts, and the person that he originally works with isn't able to give him that, or is making things difficult, and they just explode. But there is some bad behavior, there's no question, from Niven. I mean, some of the telegrams where he's demanding more money, he's demanding a bigger house, he's demanding a better hotels and although Goldwyn was no angel, he did give in and give him all sorts of benefits and stuff, and it just wasn't good enough. And eventually they just fell, the relationship just fell apart, which was really sad, because years later Niven found out that Goldwyn had kept a picture of him all through the war on his mantelpiece, because he saw Niven as a son, and he was very moved by Niven's decision to go back and fight for his country. So yeah, it was a real bust up, and it never really they never really reached a chord again after that.
I think he has a reputation of being really easygoing and everything, but you can't get that level of success, without being a bit of ruthlessness. Okay, we're kind of overrunning, so I'm going to finish up with last thing from Peter Wisniewski, who says, "Wonderful, thanks from San Francisco." So hi there.
Thank you.
So what was, do we know what David Niven's favourite film was, and what's your favourite film, Fizz?
Oh, I don't know if he knew. I think he liked a film called he liked Separate Tables. I think he also liked Around the World in 80 Days, which is a big omission for me, which is one of his biggest hits. And he also liked a film called The Court Martial in 1954, I think, where he plays a very pleasant and respectable long-serving officer who gets himself in a bit of trouble because he takes money from the petty cash. And I think he felt that film was, he understood, just like Separate Tables in a way, he understood that character, he understood the challenges that character faced. And that was I think that was one of his favourite films.
And what's your favourite David Niven film?
Oh, well, I like 55 Days in Peking, because I love all those stiff upper lip scenes where he's facing down the Boxer Rebellion all on his own with Butch, Charlton Heston. So I love all that Butch over the top stuff. And my second favourite is Separate Tables, which I absolutely love.
It's great. It's an acting masterclass.
It really is wonderful.
But there's some great character actors in that. Okay, well, thank you so much to Simone for that. Thank you, Susie, for working the slides. And thank you everyone for coming and writing such interesting comments in the Q&A. We will be sending out feedback forms. They are much appreciated. I know everything's about feedback now, but it's really nice to tell the speakers what you thought of them, because they can't hear you clapping. So good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.